Welcome students in our today's online English class. Today we will study a lesson for the student of class 10. This is the fifth chapter of your supplementary book. The name of the chapter is Footprints Without Feet. Students, this is a story about a scientist who discovers how to make himself invisible. Let's see how he uses his discovery or he tries to misuse it. Let's start reading the story. The two boys started in surprise at the fresh muddy imprints of a pair of bare feet. What was a barefooted man doing on the steps of a house in the middle of London? And where was the man? Students, the two boys on a street in London were surprised to see fresh muddy footprints of bare feet on the steps of a house. They were not able to see the man. As they gazed, a remarkable sight met their eyes. A fresh footmark appeared from nowhere. As they were still gazing means looking carefully. As they were still gazing, fresh footmark appeared. Further, footprints followed one after another, descending the steps and progressing down the street. The boys followed fascinated until the muddy impressions became fainter and fainter and at last disappeared together. Those footprints were going down the stair and then down the street. This fascinated the boys. This surprised the boys as they could not find the person making them. And they followed the footmarks until they became disappeared. The explanation of the mystery was really simple enough. The bewildered boys had been following a scientist who had just discovered how to make the human body transparent. Here, bewildered means puzzled. The simple mystery behind it was those footprints had been made by Griffith, a scientist who had discovered how to make his body invisible or transparent. Griffith, the scientist, had carried out experiments after experiments to prove that the human body could become invisible. Finally, he swallowed certain rare drugs and his body became as transparent as a sheet of glass, though it also remained as solid as gas. Rare drug means a chemical. Griffin was a great scientist, but a lawless person. He had conducted many experiments to prove that the human body could become invisible. Finally, he swallowed a rare drug, means he swallowed a chemical that made his body transparent and as solid as a sheet of glass. Brilliant scientist though he was, Griffin was rather a lawless person. His landlord disliked him and tried to eject him. In revenge, Griffin set fire to the house. To get away without being seen, he had to remove his clothes. Thus, it was that he became a homeless wanderer without clothes, without money, and quite invisible until he happened to step in some mud and left footprints as he walked. Griffin was a brilliant scientist, but he was a lawless person, so that his landlord disliked him. In revenge, Griffin set fire to his landlord's house. To escape from this situation, Griffin removed his clothes and became invisible. Later, he became a homeless wanderer in London without any clothes and without money. While he was walking, he stepped his foot in the mud, and so that it left footprints as he walked. He escaped easily enough from the boys who followed his footprints in London. But his adventures were by no means over. He had chosen a bad time of the year to wander about London without clothes. It was midwinter. The air was bitterly cold and he could not do without clothes. Instead of walking about the streets, he decided to slip into a big London store for warmth. Now, Griffin managed to escape from the observation of the two boys who were following him. But his adventures were still not completed. Here, no means over means still not completed. It was bitterly cold at the time in London because it was midwinter. Griffin decided to slip into a big London store for warmth. Closing time arrived, and as soon as the doors were shut, Griffin was able to give himself the pleasure of clothing and feeding himself without regard to expense. He broke open boxes and wrappers and fitted himself out with warm clothes. Soon, with shoes, an overcoat, and a white brimmed hat, he became a fully dressed and visible person. In the kitchen of the restaurant, he found cold meat and coffee, and he followed up the meal with sweets and wine taken from the grocery store. Finally, he settled down to sleep on a pile of quilts. The store was closed at night. Griffin wore some warm clothes, shoes, overcoat, and a hat. He ate cold meat and drank some coffee from the kitchen of the restaurant. He even had some sweets and wine from the grocery store and then went to sleep on a pile of blanket. Quilts mean blanket. If only Griffin had managed to wake up in good time, all might have been well. As it was, he did not wake up until the assistants were already arriving next morning. When Griffin woke up next morning, the shop assistants were already arriving. When he saw a couple of them approaching, he panicked and began to run. They naturally gave chase. In the end, he was able to escape only by quickly taking off his newly found clothes. So, once more he found himself invisible but naked in the chilly January air. When Griffin saw the shop assistant had already started to arrive at the shop, on being seen, Griffin panicked and started running. As he was being chased, he again took off his clothes. Consequently, he found himself invisible and naked in the chill January again. This time he decided to try the stock of a theatrical company in the hope of finding not only clothes but also something that would hide the empty space above his shoulders. Shivering with cold, he hurried to Drury Lane, the center of the theatre world. He soon found a suitable shop. He made his way invisible upstairs and came out a little later wearing bandages round his forehead, dark glasses, false nose, big bushy side whiskers, and a large hat. To escape without being seen, he callously attacked the shopkeeper from behind, after which he robbed him of all the money he could find. Griffin decided to try the goods of a theatrical company. So he reached Drury Lane, Drury Lane and entered into a shop that sold theatrical items. A little later, he came out wearing bandages, dark glasses, a false nose, big bushy whiskers, and a large hat. Then he attacked the shopkeeper and also robbed some money. Eager to get away from crowded London, he took a train to a village of Iping, where he booked two rooms at the local inn. After robbing the shopkeeper, Griffin left London and took train to the village of Iping. Here he booked two rooms in an inn. The arrival of a stranger at an inn in winter was in any case an unusual event. A stranger of such uncommon appearance set all tongues wagging. Mrs. Hall, the landlord's wife, made every effort to be friendly, but Griffin had no desire to talk and told her, "My reason for coming to Iping is a desire for solitude. I do not wish to be disturbed in my work. Besides, an accident has affected my face." Mrs. Hall, the landlord's wife, tried to be friendly with Griffin. However, Griffin told her that he had an accident and did not want to be disturbed. He came there only for solitude. Solitude means loneliness. Satisfied that her guest was an eccentric scientist and in view of the fact that he had paid her in advance, Mrs. Hall was prepared to excuse his strange habits and irritable temper. But the stolen money did not last long, and presently Griffin had to admit that he had no more ready cash. He pretended, however, that he was expecting a check to arrive at any moment. Now, eccentric means strange. Mrs. Hall ignored his strange behavior as he had paid her in advance. Soon the money that Griffin had stolen from the theatrical company was finished. He pretended that he was expecting a check that could arrive any moment. Shortly afterwards, a curious episode occurred. Very early in the morning, a clergyman and his wife were awakened by noises in the study. Creeping downstairs, they heard the chink of money being taken from the clergyman's desk. Without making any noise and with a poker grasped firmly in his hand, the clergyman flung open the door. "Surrender." Clergyman means a priest, a Christian priest. One strange thing happened very early in the morning that one clergyman and his wife were disturbed by some sound. They heard the chinks of money being taken from the clergyman's desk. The clergyman silently opened the door and warned the thief to surrender. Then, to his amazement, he realized that the room appeared to be empty. He and his wife looked under the desk and behind the curtains and even up the chimney. There wasn't a sign of anybody, yet the desk had been opened and the housekeeping money was missing. "Extraordinary affair," the clergyman kept saying for the rest of the day. Clergyman and his wife was shocked to find that nobody was there and the money was missing. The whole day he was saying only one thing: it was an extraordinary affair. But it was not as extraordinary as the behavior of Mrs. Hall's furniture. A little later that morning, the landlord and his wife were up very early and was surprised to see the scientist's door wide open. Usually it was shut and locked, and he was furious if anyone enters his room. The opportunity seemed too good to be missed. They peeped round the door, saw nobody, and decided to investigate. The bedclothes were cold, showing that the scientist must have been up for some time, and stranger still, the clothes and bandages that he always wore were lying about the room. On the same day, when Mrs. Hall found Griffin room open with his bandages and clothes lying around, she and her husband enters the room. The bed clothes were cold, showing that the scientist had got up early morning. All of a sudden, Mrs. Hall heard a sniff close to her ear. A moment later, the hat on the bedpost leapt up and dashed itself into her face. Then the bedroom chair became alive. Springing into the air, it charged straight to her, legs foremost. As she and her husband turned away in the terror, the extraordinary chair pushed them both out of the room and then appeared to slam and lock the door after them. Suddenly, Mrs. Hall heard a sniff, and the hat near the bedpost was thrown on her face. Then, bedroom chair was became alive, and it was thrown at her legs. Both the landlord and his wife were pushed out of the room by the chair with a slam. Slam means shut loudly. Mrs. Hall almost fell down the stair in hysteric. Hysteric means fainting in. She was convinced that the room was haunted by spirits and that the stranger had somehow caused these to enter into her furniture. My poor mother used to sit in this chair, she moaned. To think it should rise up against me now. Mrs. Hall fell down from the stairs in faint, and that the furniture was uh, haunted. He she thought that spirits entered into her furniture, and she blamed on the scientist for this. My poor mother used to sit in that chair, she murmured in her faint condition. The feeling among the neighbors was that the trouble was caused by witchcrafts, but witchcrafts or not. When news of the burglary at the clergyman's home became known, the strange scientist was strongly suspected of having had a hand in it. Suspicion grew even stronger when he suddenly produced some ready cash, though he had admitted not long before that he had no money. Mrs. Hall blamed for the strange events, which the neighbors blamed black magic. Soon the news of burglary at clergyman's home was spread. Most people in the village felt that the strange scientist was involved in it because he paid his due rent. The village constable was secretly sent for instead of waiting for the constable. Mrs. Hall went to the scientist who had somehow mysteriously appeared from his empty bedroom. Now, the village constable was secretly sent for the investigation instead of waiting for the constable. Mrs. Hall went to the scientist's room, but the scientist somehow mysteriously appeared from his empty bedroom. I want to know what you have been doing to my chair upstairs, she demanded, and I want to know how it you came out of an empty room and how you entered a locked room. Now, Mrs. Hall went to Griffin and inquired what he had been doing with her chair in the room. She also inquired that how did he came out an empty room and entered a locked room. The scientist was always quick tempered. Now he became furious. You don't understand who or what I am, he shouted. Very well, I'll show you. The scientist lost his temper. He decided to show everything. Suddenly, he threw off bandages, whiskers, spectacles, and even nose. It took him only a minute to do this. The horrified people in the bar found themselves staring at a headless man. Now, very soon he threw off his bandages, spectacles, whiskers, and his nose. People who gathered there were horrified to see the headless man. Mr. Jaffers, the constable, now arrived and was quite surprised to find that he had to arrest a man without a head. But Jaffers was not easily prevented from doing his duty. If a magistrate's warrant ordered a person's arrest, then that person had to be arrested with or without his head. Now, Mr. Jaffers, the constable, arrived, and he was surprised to see that he had to arrest a man without head. But it was the order of magistrate, and he had a arrest warrant, so he had to arrest the man with or without his head. There followed a remarkable scene as a as the policeman tried to get hold of a man who was becoming more and more invisible as he threw off one garment after another. Finally, a shirt flew into the air, and the constable found himself struggling with someone he could not see at all. Some people tried to help him but found themselves hit by the blows that seemed to come from nowhere. When Constable arrived, and he was surprised to see the man without head. He tried to catch it, yet the people also helped him. He removed all his clothes one after another and finally became invisible. So it will be a little hard to all of them to catch a person who is without figure. People tried to help him, but they found themselves hit by blows. Blows means blows means powerful hit by the hand. People couldn't see where they are coming from. In the end, Jeffers was knocked unconscious as he made a last attempt to hold on to the unseen scientist. There were nervous, excited cries of hold him, but this was easier said than done. Griffin had shaken himself free and no one knew where to lay hands on him. Soon, Jaffer became unconscious. Unconscious means faint. Jaffer became unconscious and Griffin ran away. No one knew where he had gone. So, student, thus we came to know that the Griffin discovered a drug that he misused. That's all for the day.